Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, the statue wars, the ridiculous rewriting of history comes to Australia. I'll be talking to Fred Nile about same-sex marriage, vote and religious freedom. We've got a great political panel with Tanveer, Ahmed and Eros. We've got Zeg's Cartoons, The Outsiders Outhouse and the Left Lunatic of the Week coming from the Huffington Post. No surprise there, but it's a great show. Stay tuned. Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. We don't have any list of taboo subjects or words here. We give you the straight talk, the all-important straight talk that's designed to provide the information you don't find in the mainstream media. Please understand we've got a very important website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. There it is on the screen, marklathamsoutsiders.com. That's where you can register for all the Rebel Australia and Mark Latham's Outsiders activities. We've got very important campaigns running. What we're trying to do is push back against political correctness and social engineering and identity politics in Australia. So many people say to me there's a madness in the country where people are trying to rewrite history. They're trying to social engineer outcomes through our schools, our universities, through all our public institutions. And it's on that subject that I want to start this evening's show. I want to talk about the rewriting of history and what's become the statue wars in the United States. We saw the terrible division and violence on the streets of Charlottesville. That started with the local council there. They've sort of missed a lot of the responsibility, but they started this whole divisive process by wanting to tear down a statue of the Civil War legend Robert E. Lee. Now, my understanding of American history is that Robert E. Lee was a man of honour. He had his military education in the North. He fought with distinction in the Mexican War, and the Lincoln administration tried to sign him up as a senior commander in the Union forces at the beginning of the Civil War. Robert E. Lee, to his credit, said he couldn't fight against his home state of Virginia. He couldn't lift a sword against his fellow Virginians, so he led the South. And he was a very, very effective military commander in the early years of the Civil War. It's often said that if he was leading the North, the Civil War wouldn't have been as prolonged as it was. When the war ended, Lee said that the abolition of slavery would be a good thing for the South. Now, why in that historical context people want to tear down his statue is hard to believe. But what you've got in the mainstream media is reporting about the division where they focus on such a small section of the political community, the political class. You have white supremacists, neo-Nazis in the United States. You have this very small element here in Australia as well. But in both countries, they are 0.1% of the population, 0.1% of the population. At the other end, you've got Antifa and Antifa and all these left-wing organisations, Trots, communists, socialists and the like. They're 0.1% of the population as well. So the fights that you see on the streets of Charlottesville that ended in the tragic murder of a woman represent just 0.2% of the population. So this is such a minority element, but the left is trying to rewrite history, to engage in the statue wars. They're all trying to pin it to Donald Trump as a political tactic. This is political correctness. It's political correctness to go back into history and try and judge people by the standards of 2017. Now, unfortunately, the same thing is now happening in Australia. In the last couple of days, the statue wars, the history wars have been brought to Australia foolishly by this guy, Stan Grant. This guy, Stan Grant, who's the Indigenous editor at the far left ABC. And he has, on the ABC website, put together this article here, claiming that Captain James Cook didn't discover Australia, and Stan Grant is objecting to the inscription on this Cook statue in Hyde Park, Sydney. The statue inscription reads that Cook discovered this territory 1770. Well, he most certainly did. And you can't revise any of that history, Stan Grant. What you're doing opportunistically, given the circumstances in the United States, is bringing this same division, this same element of political correctness and rewriting to Australia. And if you think for a single moment this is helping Indigenous reconciliation, well, think again. You're an absolute fool. All this does is build up resentment among fair-minded Australians who don't like the idea of our history being rewritten for ideological reasons. Now the truth is, Captain James Cook found the east coast of Australia, he sailed the length of it, he navigated it, he mapped it out for the first time by any European. And if Captain Cook didn't discover Australia in 1770, who did? Well, Stan Grant can't answer that question. He can't answer the question as to who discovered Australia if it wasn't James Cook. Now, no one these days pretends, of course, that Australia was an unoccupied territory in 1770. Everyone understands Indigenous people had been here for 40,000 years or more. But when we say Captain Cook discovered Australia, it's in the context of a European viewpoint. From a European point of view, Captain Cook discovered Australia in 1770. That is an historical fact written in concrete, and there's nothing Stan Grant or anyone else should be able to do about it. It's like saying that Marco Polo didn't discover China. Well, no one is saying there were no Chinese there, but he was the first European to make the major discoveries in the Orient. No one is saying that Christopher Columbus didn't discover the Americas. We all acknowledge there were American Indians and other populations in the Americas at that time, but from a European point of view, it was Columbus who made the initial discovery. And what I find particularly offensive about Stan Grant's argument to rewrite history, to change all the history books effectively, to rip up the history books in schools and universities to say that Captain Cook didn't discover Australia, is just how it diminishes the legend of someone who was a very fine and brave person. I mean, imagine in 1770 on a tiny vessel, the Endeavour, sailing to the other side of the world, the bravery, the skill, the ingenuity that was needed to achieve this, literally sailing into the unknown, not even knowing, in the case of James Cook, if you'd find anything out there in the vast waters of the southern hemisphere. So Cook did that. An amazing achievement 250 years ago, and it doesn't deserve to be diminished by Stan Grant from the far left ABC doing this, feeding off the American division and conflict and problems, trying to bring them to Australia, and in his own crazy mind thinking this helps Indigenous reconciliation in Australia. And it just doesn't. And the other point it makes is this the biggest problem in Indigenous Australia? A couple of words on a statue in Hyde Park? I mean, look at the domestic violence, the drug use, the unemployment, the welfare dependency, communities that have got massive problems. And this imbecile Stan Grant has got a single focus about a couple of words on a statue in Hyde Park. Way out of touch. The absolute epitome of political elitism. So Stan Grant, pull your head in, and for others trying to join in, they're just as crazy. Now, we've had the news just today that there's a move in Victoria to rename federal electorates. Some lefties down there don't like the name Batman. John Batman is said to have been a racist in his day, so they want to change that electorate name. Angus McMillan, the same thing. The left want to start changing electorate names. And this is part of the campaign to rewrite our history. They want to get rid of Australia Day. We're pushing back against that with our campaign, saveaustraliaday.com. Sign the petition, saveaustraliaday.com. We want to save our National Day on the 26th of January. But the push to rewrite the names of federal electorates, well, this will be never-ending work in Australia, a never-ending divisive process. Because you can look at all the federal electorate names, and each one of the leaders of Australia up to 1966 were lifelong supporters of white Australia. So that's just the historical reality in Australia. Every national leader we've had up to 1966 was a lifelong supporter of white Australia. So if you want to go wiping out their names on the electorate map of Australia, the federal electorates, you'll be wiping out Menzies, Curtin, Chifley, Corwell, Barton, Reid, Deakin, Fisher, Hughes, Bruce, Lyons, and probably a few more. So this will be never-ending work. The left process here of trying to rewrite history, engage in the statue wars, try and apply the standards of today to centuries ago, this foolish process of applying political correctness to things that happened 100, 200 years ago, this will divide our country. But it's the tactic you get from people like Stan Grant at the far left ABC. They want to rip the country in two and then pick up the bigger part for their own political and ideological purpose. It's just plain wrong and unnecessary. So we're standing against that here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'm sure your average Australian is horrified to see this process and the sort of trouble we've seen in the United States imported into Australia. We just don't need it. So thanks for watching this evening. In a short while I'll be talking to Fred Nile about another issue, a divisive issue the left have put on the agenda, same-sex marriage and religious freedom. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. We're coming to you in front of the magnificent Diplomat Motel in Alice Springs, right in the centre of Australia. The ultimate outsider destination, Alice Springs. We love the people there, and we love Fred Nile and Silvana Nile, who've joined us to talk about same-sex marriage and religious freedom. Thanks, Silvana. You've been a candidate for the Christian Democrats and planning to run again, is that right?
Yes, I'd like to be running in 2019 for the Senate.
Well, you're very brave to run for public office at the moment. It's a real fight out there with plenty of abuse flying left, right and centre, but thanks for coming on the show. And Fred, yes, you're quite the legend of the New South Wales Parliament. You've been there since 1981, 36 years.
36.
We're talking about changing statues. Maybe they should build a statue for you for long service in the New South Wales Parliament.
They do have them on the walls in the upper house.
Can I ask, how has politics changed in that time, and how do you in particular handle the vilification, all the name calling? Because wow, you've been in the centre of so many controversial debates from a Christian point of view. At a personal level, how do you handle all that?
It's water for ducks back. And I believe I want to serve God, and Jesus, when he called his disciples, said, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. So he warned them in his first sermon, you're going to have a hard time, guys, following me. And so I thought, well, I shouldn't be surprised if I get criticised or attacked.
Okay, well, that's probably a good way to handle it. And how have you seen politics change? What's the major change you've seen in the 36 years in the way politics operates in this country?
I think it's a lot more devious, how people operate within the parties and across the parties, which you've seen as well.
Yeah, I suppose the faction operators, the machine men, the tricks that they play. I suppose there was a lot more honour there in the 80s. People were a lot more straightforward in how they presented themselves.
Yeah, might have had a better quality of person.
Yeah. Well, Silvana, how do you see the gay marriage debate? What do you think are the major problems with the way it's handled by the federal government and the process we're going through?
Yes, well, I think I'm going to take the public aspect. I feel it's trying to divide our nation. What I really believe is that we really have already in the scriptures saying that there's one man and one woman, and to have a group come out and try and change and redefine marriage as what it already exists as is a no-go. I know we have to vote on it, but coming from our perspective, it has to be a no to keep so we don't have the changes across Australia in the education system, in the court system, the safety for the children, the security for the children within the family. I've been an educator for 35 years. I can see the ramifications that would happen to our children in an education setting.
Fred, do you think the public knows enough about this? Because over the years I've been a supporter of same-sex marriage, but I'm worried about the question now because it seems to go way beyond same-sex couples. And in Canada, they've had an experience where they've passed the changes to their Marriage Act for same-sex, but it's brought in a whole bunch of other gender and sexuality categories. Let's have a look at a leaflet from the Canadian Teachers Union organising inclusiveness training, and it brings in all these different groups. Now, lesbian, gay, we know those, but it goes on to gender, queer, bisexual, demisexual, transgender, transsexual, two-spirit, whatever that is, intersex, queer, questioning, and on it goes, pansexual, polyamorous. Does the public really understand the scope of what's involved here? I'm worried that it goes way beyond same-sex marriage into categories and descriptors that I've got absolutely no idea what's involved.
Well, that's what's happening, and you'll be looking at some of this stuff later with the baker and the cake. There's a real flow on from changing this basic law. Our law has always been marriage between a male and a female, which is what we believe the Creator intended. And so we believe that's the best way to go. And by changing it, then you have all these consequences, which will go right through our education system, our society, people in their jobs, and so on. It's very, very serious.
Yeah, well,
it's the biggest change facing Australia.
Well, it's a major change in institutions, and we've seen in the United States and elsewhere that people who don't want to necessarily participate, for instance, baking a wedding cake for a gay marriage, they get taken to court.
Yeah.
And let's just look at this clip from Colorado in the United States, where the poor old cake maker is ending up in the Supreme Court of the United States simply for not wanting to participate in that gay marriage. Let's have a look.
A Colorado case we have been following for years is now headed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
A baker in Lakewood refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, arguing that it violated his religious beliefs. Political specialist Sean Boyd talked to that baker, joins us live outside his Lakewood bakery or inside his Lakewood bakery with what's new with this case tonight. Sean?
You know, Karen, depending on how the court rules, this could be a landmark case. It pits religious liberties against civil liberties and is one of several similar cases around the country that challenge anti-discrimination laws that some say violate First Amendment rights. Masterpiece cake shop owner Jack Phillips was overcome by emotion after learning the nation's highest court would take up his case.
Then she called right a minute after that. Did you hear? Yeah, and I can't breathe.
The case of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission began 5 years ago when Charlie Craig and Dave Mullins asked Phillips to make a cake for their wedding reception. Phillips refused, saying his cakes are artistic expression, and creating a cake celebrating gay marriage violates his religious beliefs.
Well, Silvana, that's the experience in the United States. Now, the opinion polling in Australia seems to indicate the postal vote question will be carried. If that happens, what do we need to do to protect our religious freedoms here?
We have to protect our exemptions that we already have in place in our schools and in our Christian organisations and communities. We need to be able to protect our democracy, giving us that, that religious right, that religious freedom in a democracy.
Yeah, I would have thought on religious grounds, anyone who doesn't want to participate in a same-sex marriage for whatever reason should not be persecuted or accused or sent to the legal system. I mean, the big worry is that if the militant gay left launched protests and did all that campaigning against a beer company like Cooper's just because they organised the debate between two parliamentarians, wow, how fanatical and hysterical will they be about a baker or a celibate who doesn't participate in gay marriage because of religious grounds? A big worry, isn't it, Fred?
That's right. Well, people are losing their jobs already in companies. If they speak up saying they're not in favour of same-sex marriage, the company says, well, we're going to get rid of you.
Yeah, so people are losing their jobs and being persecuted for nothing more than having a Christian set of beliefs.
That's right.
Or being opposed for other reasons to gay marriage. Now, in the New South Wales Parliament, we've had this big controversy, a related issue of safe schools.
Yeah.
Fred, what's going on when we get this type of headline in the Daily Telegraph that the bureaucrats are bringing safe schools back in through the back door on websites, gender fluidity theory? Being taught to our young people. As the state government lost control of the education bureaucracy, is this problem so advanced
it's amazing.
in the public servants that the government can't control it?
We've had to work hard to get the Safe School program out of the schools and using our balance of power and lobbying the Premier and having face-to-face talks. And so the government has agreed to get rid of it. But the bureaucrats behind the scenes are putting it back in again.
Or should the government get rid of those bureaucrats?
That's right. The Premier's got to stand up, Gladys, and do something about it.
Well, Mark Scott's running the education department. He ran the ABC and it was overtaken by the left. So is the same thing happening with our schools under Scott?
Well, they may think he's a soft target, yes.
Right, well, it appears that way. I wanted to raise one other issue, and that was about the car bombing attack on the Australian Christian lobby in Canberra.
Yes.
And this was in December, and the police came out and said, oh, it's nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with terrorism, it was sort of just an accident.
Yes.
How worried are you that we've now got the news that the guy who did this, this terrible act, was actually campaigning against the ACL, and the police and perhaps the medical services have covered up the truth?
That's right. Well, the police should be attacked and criticised for hiding the truth and saying it had nothing to do with politics or anything else. And the guy was planning this terrorist attack on the ACL head office with gas tanks in his car to blow the office up. And he almost did. It cost $100,000 worth of damage. Now the police are putting out the interview where he admits, I monitored this organisation, I don't agree with their policy on same-sex marriage and so on. It says he's a homosexual. And so he decided to blow the office up.
Yeah, well, it's in the court documents. So, Silvana, how big a worry is it that political correctness has gone so far that it may well have infiltrated the police there in the ACT and we can't even get the truth?
Yes, well, the federal police, sadly, in my opinion, I've seen this happen before. There doesn't seem, I've heard Christians saying that there's persecution of Christians in the ACT now. For example, my husband led a group against unsafe schools, and there were 12 police standing around when gays and lesbians came up and tackled PA systems and caused damage on stage. And those police were told to stand back and not intervene in anything that happened.
Really?
Now, we had the rights, we had the
standing with
security.
12 police with their arms folded
Right.
while this mob knocked over the lectern and upset the PA. They actually got, the protesters got between the audience and the speakers. So I was one of the speakers.
Wow.
But we just kept going. But I was amazed how the police just stood there with their arms folded. Now, that often happens with the political. They know the politics. The police aren't fools. And you've got a Labor-Green government. So they're not going to go out on a limb taking a strong stand on this issue.
Well, there should be a Senate inquiry, shouldn't there, into the ACL car bombing and the sort of thing you're talking about. The federal parliament still has jurisdiction
That's right.
over
Yes.
the territories, the
Yeah.
ACT. So
Definitely.
would you like to see a Senate inquiry into all these things and
Definitely,
get to the truth? Get to the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what's happening?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
let's hope that happens. And thanks for coming in
No,
and
my
joining us
pleasure.
on the show. Silvana, what's coming up for the Christian Democrats? What's the big plan?
Oh, I'd say we're gearing up for the elections. We're gearing up for the state and the federal, and the big plans are to win a seat, win a seat for a second time in the state, and to win a seat in the federal.
Well, I think anyone in modern politics who consistently fights for their beliefs is to be admired. You
Yes.
two are in that category. Thanks for
you.
joining us here on Mark Latham's Outsiders. And in a short
Thank
while,
you.
we'll be back to have a look at the great Zeg's cartoons. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders. Now, one of the segments we get so much positive feedback from the viewers is Zeg's cartoons. We all love Zeg and the political message with a bit of comedy thrown in that he brings us each and every week. Let's see what he's got for us. His first cartoon is about the safe schools debate in Victoria and elsewhere. In New South Wales, they've tried to sneak this program back in the past week, thankfully rejected by the state government. And there's Zeg pointing out just how much division and problem. This is supposed to be an anti-bullying campaign, but it's causing so many problems in the school playground that in fact it's ending up with the opposite outcome. Victoria leads the way in safe schools of Australia, God help us. Okay, thanks Zeg for that one. And his second cartoon this evening is on the controversy about Pauline Hanson wearing the burqa into the Senate. And of course, wow, didn't she cop it off the mainstream media? Very often with Hanson, it's not what she says or does, it's the type of media reaction that tells us a lot about today's left-wing politics. And there's Zeg pointing out that they're flogging the dead horse there with Hanson and the burqa, and people need to turn to the alternative media. Going online, The Rebel will save me. Well, too right. Well done, Zeg. Absolute cracking cartoons. And we'll have the great Zeg in the studio here for the show next Wednesday. We always look forward to that. And his other piece of work, of course, is to show us the Outsiders Outhouse. He's got me there on the Thunderbox, the last place in the country you've got freedom of expression, freedom of thought and activity. There I am in the Outsiders Outhouse, and we love your views. Please send them in to mark.latham@TheRebel.media. That's the email address. And this week we have some wonderful contributions that have been sent in. The first is anonymous, for the reason he points out. He wants to stay anonymous because if he publishes anything negative about Woolworths, they're going to fire this guy. And he goes on to write, I work at Woolworths Liquor Distribution Centre in Melbourne, and our warehouse has been infiltrated with politically correct nutters in management. They decided to come up with the loony idea of Wear Purple Day. Well, that's even in the Defence Force, Wear Purple Day. They're encouraging the workers to wear something purple to show their support for the LGBTI WTF community. Support them for what? Our viewer writes. The management didn't say it was in regards to same-sex marriage. If we really want the LGBTI community to be equal with everyone, why would these idiots at Woolworths make a special day for them and not anyone else? Well, that's a great question, and it does beg a belief. Woolworths are losing the plot with their PC rubbish. Anyway, love you, Mark. Keep telling it how it is. Well, mate, I'll try and do that, and I don't understand why changing the clothes at a liquor distribution centre needs to be happening, why we need politics, why Woolworths thinks it's now sub-branch of the political system, like a political party, making people wear purple. And it's obviously causing a lot of problems, lowering morale among their staff. How can any of this be in the financial interests of the company and its shareholders? The second contribution to the Outhouse this evening comes from Sean, and he wants to share a story of what's going on in one of Australia's big banks. Starting in 2015, the culture has switched to a social justice warrior's paradise, with all the trimmings, affirmative action, diversity training sessions, and the internal news about the newest achievement which we've earned from some ideological third party who can apparently give out diversity culture awards. Well, this is all over big corporate Australia. Sean has witnessed quotas being filled in the hiring process, brand new $200,000 a year teams being created to monitor the company progress, and best of all, in our financial year stats, the diversity figures are equally showcased next to the bank's net profits. I'm only a 25-year-old guy, he writes, with a promising career ahead. So without pulling a James Damore, that's the guy from Google, and getting the boot, I see no way out of this tailspin. Maybe you're right, and it will reach the tipping point and self-implode, but I'm not holding my breath. All the best, mate. I hope to see you around and have a beer one day. Well, Sean, it would be great to have a beer with you. You're aware of the craziness of these agendas inside big corporate Australia. I wrote about it in the Sydney Daily Telegraph just yesterday, how this diversity agenda is not helping the financial bottom line. It's lowering morale. It's a divisive process within these companies for political reasons. And importantly, it's actually disadvantaging white middle-class men, middle-aged men who are losing their jobs and being thrown on the scrap heap. So Sean, keep maintaining your dissatisfaction and do whatever you can to generate a proper corporate and fair approach at the bank you work for. And finally, from Brody Kidd, we have this letter. G'day, Mark. Absolutely love the show and what you're doing. Well, thanks for that, Brody. I just wanted to say I'm absolutely appalled by George Brandis's apologetic rubbish in the Senate the other day. First, the rejection of the Bondi Synagogue, and now we have to put up with this rubbish, talking about Brandis's speech with Pauline Hanson and the burqa. Talk about pandering to the culture of can't talk your mind for fear of offence. Senator Hanson is well within her charter to bring up topics for discussion. We need to make these spineless buffoons wake up and make them realise they are elected to represent all of us and not apologise on behalf of minorities. Well, we're going to talk about that in a short while with Tanveer, Ahmed and Emma Eros. But I just want to pass on some news about the Bondi Synagogue. A number of viewers have raised this with me. It was outrageous. The council said the synagogue couldn't be approved because of fears about Islamic terrorism. That's caving in to the worst elements in society. Well, the good news is there's a reconsideration there of the synagogue in Bondi, and I've spoken to some of the proponents and supporters who say that it looks encouraging and quite likely it will be approved by the end of the year. Well, thank goodness that common sense will prevail at the end. Now, finally, in this segment, we have our Left Lunatic of the Week. Again, Zeg has got the drawing. Wow, when you have a look at the drawing he's put up here on screen, you'll see just the amazing collection of left lunatics that we've honoured in this segment. Have a look at them all. Wouldn't you be worried about Australia's future just by looking at that collection? And in the middle, we've got this week's Left Lunatic. It's Lisa Wilkinson. She's got the red bandana there just to her right saying, pick me, but no, Peter, we've given it to you. Good lady spouse Lisa for the shocker that was undertaken by Huffington Post. Lisa Wilkinson is a senior editor at the Huffington Post, and when Steve Bannon left the White House staff last week, they started out with a headline which read Goy Boy, Goy being a Jewish term for people you might not like. People say it's racist to use that, Goy Boy. This is playing into the conspiracy theory that Bannon was done in by Kushner there, Trump's Jewish son-in-law, as part of some White House power struggle. Disgraceful they'd use such a racist term in their headline, the Huffington Post. Then they changed it and moved it to the one you see there on the right, white flight. No better at all. Again, bringing skin colour into the debate about Steve Bannon. Now, how crazy are the left? Do we hear Lisa Wilkinson on her high horse? She's against all these pious issues. She's piously campaigning against just about everything under the sun. Has she disassociated herself or complained about the racism of Huffington Post? Of course she hasn't, and that's why she's a very worthy winner of this week's Left Lunatic of the Week. So thanks again for watching, and in a short while I'll be back with our panel, Tanveer Ahmed and Emma Eros. Welcome back to Mark Latham's Outsiders, where I'm joined by Emma Eros. Thanks for coming back in, Emma. A regular here. You haven't got a cream pie this time, I hope.
No, I've got a handshake.
I'm still recovering from that, as is my dry cleaner. And Tanveer, Ahmed, good to see you.
Good to see you again,
From
Mark.
Rebel Australia, and now working in the Bankstown district in the
that's
medical
right.
profession, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, there's been lots of news in Australian politics over the past week, but the one thing that's got everyone talking is the Pauline Hanson wearing of the burqa in the Australian Senate. Emma, how did you see it?
I didn't find that offensive. She made a statement. It's something we're all discussing, we're all talking about. We have a concern. I think it's very important we acknowledge this. It is something that we have to think about. There could be a man wearing a bomb underneath this burqa. It isn't a religious requirement. So she has a point. I have to agree with Pauline Hanson on this one. She may have addressed it differently.
Right.
Okay, I get it, but I did not find it offensive.
No, but the burqa itself, coming from an Islamic background, people say it's a piece of oppression against women. It's part of the Quran where the bare flesh of a woman can't be viewed by male strangers. So do you agree with the banning of the burqa in Australia?
I do agree with the banning of the burqa. I'd like to know who's next to me. I mean, I'd like to see your face. Do these people work? Are they contributing to society? That's another thing. Besides security measures, do they work? What if, majority start wearing it and we can't work because we can't show our face? I know it's cruel to say that, but I don't know. What's your opinion? I just feel that it's just...
Look, in terms of what Pauline Hanson does, I think there was an element of a stunt to it, but it certainly, raised the issue.
Yep.
I mean, in general, people should be allowed to wear what they want in terms of their beliefs. I think the hijab and niqab have acquired different symbolisms to their original meaning in Islam to some people. It's more, to some degree. For some, it's about female empowerment. Yeah. For some, it's about protest, particularly against mainstream Western society. I think the broader issue with things like the niqab, which is a tiny minority of people who might wear that, is I think it still raises the question there are some areas of particularly Islam which do demand a compromise of mainstream Western society, which I don't think we should give into. And in the case of the niqab, I think there are places, for example, obviously the courts could be in that civic basic roles, be it, say, you might be a teacher. Sometimes it comes up as in a hospital where, they might make demands that I can't be seen by male.
Now, the niqab is a full covering?
Yeah,
similar to the burqa?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, I guess it's beyond the burqa, but I think those sort of areas where it is essential that we demand a compromise. I don't believe in banning the kind of burqa, but that as such.
No issue with putting a scarf on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in terms of where your face is utterly covered, particularly in areas where you are engaging in some sort of role with other members of the public.
Well, a lot of the public complaint seems to be, say, in a bank, people say they had to take the bike helmet off, but the full Islamic covering can stay on for the person next in queue. At airport security, people say, the baseball cap's got to come off, but the burqa stays on. So wouldn't it be fair in those circumstances to say if one person has to show the full face, everyone does?
Absolutely. It is important. We all need to know who's around us, especially now in this time, this day and age with what's going on. I think we need to sort of see a person and just acknowledge that they're human, they're not a man under that, which is a big scare for some.
Yeah, well, in the debate about terrorism, Pauline Hanson had a debate with Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens on 7 Sunrise, and this is how it went.
You're doing ISIS's work for them. It is extremely dangerous. You're putting the entire country at risk. And you say that you are worried about people's security, yet you have refused to listen to the advice of the experts. Everyone knew it was you being a goose. Everyone knew it was you being a goose. Everyone knew it was you putting the country in danger and having a stupid
We're going
stunt.
to put $16 million into the security of the Parliament. It does need to be assessed. It needs to be debated. We need to
put the country in more danger. The next attack in Australia will be on your head, Pauline.
Jewellery.
Tanveer, is that true? The next terrorist attack will be on
Pauline
Pauline Hanson's head?
I think that's very much over the top, especially from someone who's essentially encouraged open borders and is is an apologist for many aspects of terrorism, in terms of Senator Young. It's a fine line, I guess, asking questions of Islam and Muslim communities, but retaining alliances, not kind of vilifying, every Muslim. That's always a tough balance. I think it's reasonable to ask tough questions. Often like the differential making is between Muslims, ordinary Muslims, and the ideas ingrained in Islam, which aren't necessarily what ordinary Muslims are always applying. So that's often this kind of differentiation that it's important to always make.
You see a lot of diversity in the Islamic community.
Of course, I mean, people...
The important thing is to realistically talk about the communities that have got problems, while also recognising some
take on the
Muslim
ideas,
communities are doing
take
the right
on
thing.
the ideas, take on the sections within Islamic communities that are starting to, engage with ideas that we think are dangerous or not compatible with Western society. But the vast majority of Muslims, look, most people don't live according to a holy book. They take on bits of modern society, they take on bits of what their friends are doing, they assert Western aspects of identity, and they link it with, their interpretations of Islam. That's how people live. It's a bit of a mishmash. So that's where it's important to say, okay, the vast majority of Muslims, particularly Australia, which is very well integrated, partly because we pick skilled migrants, we're a strong economy, we're tolerant. It is a well-integrated Muslim community here, but that doesn't stop us from challenging and attacking ideas in Islam that do filter out to sections of the community.
Emma, you've got a particular worry about youth radicalisation?
I do, I had a discussion with a few people actually abroad in London and in Barcelona recently, and they were saying, it's unfortunate what's happened, it's really sad. I was at Barcelona this time last year, so they were saying they were young boys. Where were they learning? Where were their parents? Did they not pay attention to what school or what sermon they were getting taught? They need to know, the parents need to be vigilant. They need to take their hands off their face, start paying attention. I mean, when we send our children to school, we want to know what they learn, who their teacher is, and so forth. I believe parents need to, and the communities, we need to pay attention. We need to start, observing any changes. We need to drive them out of our homes, drive them out of our community, because this is not acceptable here. And we don't want, it's not acceptable anywhere else, but, we have to start. And I think we need to get parents paying attention, because it's up to the family. It really is.
Well, Tanveer, you're working in the medical sector in Bankstown at the moment and talking about youth culture and different issues. The federal government's applying its new drug testing welfare law. I suppose ice is the big problem there with drugs.
Definitely, amphetamines is a huge problem.
What can you do about someone who's got an ice addiction and is taking welfare?
Look, the reality is addiction is obviously a multifaceted, difficult problem, but it's not purely medical. And I think that's what the government program to target drug test welfare recipients is saying. That's why I think a lot of doctors coming out criticising it are entirely accurate, because the medical model has not worked for addiction, because there is a dimension beyond so-called brain disease. There is a moral dimension, there's a behavioural dimension, and there's an element of choice. There is, but it's usually in people who have poor coping skills. And this is the way they cope. Amphetamine is particularly problematic because it's highly addictive and it's quite cheap. It's relatively cheap and quite available. So I think this welfare testing, drug testing of welfare recipients, what it can do is it's in reinforcing that idea of mutual obligation in welfare, that we do have expectations if you're receiving welfare. Often what happens as a doctor is, often people who use drugs, where they're writing sick certificates, Centrelink sick certificates, saying, okay, you don't have to go out and look for jobs. And it actually puts us in a difficult position, because you're there trying to treat them, keep up your rapport, and they essentially keep coming and going, I'm still trying to, I'm having problems with this, can you write me a sick certificate? And it's often easier just writing it and go to keep them in the treatment game. Where this program I think might help is that the government taking on the role of a kind of bad cop and allowing others to take on the focus of treatment may actually be quite helpful.
But realistically, this welfare trial in Bankstown in Western Sydney, will they be able to restrict welfare payments to people buying food and paying their rent, and they won't be able to spend any of the money on ice? Is this realistic? Is it going to happen in practice?
Look, I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. But I think what it may do is just the hassle for a portion, I think what it'll do is it'll force them to contend just to start weighing things up. And some of them will actually then go, it might actually be worth my while engaging with
Well,
treatment.
it is a trial. We'll see how it
Right.
goes. Emma, do you think it'll be successful?
We've got to try something.
Right.
And I think it's okay. I think you've got to be hard.
A lot of relatives will support it.
Right. Well, we'll see how that unfolds. So we've run out of time. Thanks, Tanveer and Emma, for joining us. Thank you to the viewers for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We'll be back next Wednesday night. Hopefully you've enjoyed the show and received some information you just don't get in the mainstream media. We try to give you the alternative point of view. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Wednesday.